city. Then the Lord God provided a vine and made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was very happy about the vine. But at dawn the next day, God provided a worm which chewed the vine so that it withered. When the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, "It will be better for me to die than to live." But the Lord said to Jonah, "Do you have a right to be angry about the vine?" "I do," he said. "I am angry enough to die." So why is Jonah so angry? Why is he so angry? He is a prophet, in other words, a preacher, and he gets to preach to one of the greatest cities of his time. And when he does, the whole city repents with fasting and calls upon God. Now, this is every preacher's dream. Yet, here we find Jonah sitting in the sand in the desert east of the city, waiting, watching to see if what he had hoped to happen happens. He sits there exposed to and sitting under the scorching heat of the desert sun, much hotter than it is today, hoping for the utter annihilation of Nineveh. And when it becomes apparent that this will not happen, in his frustration, he cries out to God, "If you aren't going to destroy them, kill me." He sits there seething with rage, so angry that he wants to die. Now, that he would sit in the sand from the weariness of traveling and preaching, I can kind of relate to. Sometimes I just want to lie down and never wake up again. So tired, in fact, that I feel like dying. But today is one of those days for me. But angry after witnessing the power of God at work in the lives of thousands of people through the word that was preached through him. Why is Jonah so angry? Angry enough that he wants to die. From Jonah's perspective, God is not behaving as he ought. Now make no mistake, Jonah knew God. From the earlier chapters of this book, we can tell that Jonah was in agreement with God in all things theological and doctrinal. For instance, both God and Jonah agreed that Nineveh is wicked. Nineveh was a very wicked city. We'll come back to this point a bit more later on, but for now know that there's a whole book in the Bible that's devoted just to pronouncing judgment upon the city of Nineveh. So Jonah is in complete agreement with God in that they both see Nineveh as being wicked. Jonah also knows that God can save the wicked miraculously. From the psalm he offered up about God's rescue from the belly of the fish, in chapter 2, verse 9, Jonah proclaims, "Deliverance belongs to the Lord." So Jonah knows firsthand that God can save rebels who are about to die. Finally, Jonah agrees with God in that it is in God's nature to be gracious and merciful. In fact, he had this nagging suspicion that God very likely would extend his grace and mercy toward Nineveh, and he didn't like that. So he proclaims in chapter 4, verse 2, "Is this not what I said while I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity." So Jonah knew God, and yet the theological agreement Jonah had with God was not producing a heart agreement. They did not have the same heart toward Nineveh. On one hand, we have God who desires to extend his grace and mercy toward the city, and here we find Jonah hoping for the utter annihilation of that very same city. This is the problem. And it's sad. Perhaps the most miserable thing that can happen to you is when your knowing of God does not translate to your alignment with God. Jonah, do you have any right to be angry? Do you do well to be angry, Jonah? Verse 10. If you are angry, if you are concerned about the plant which you neither tended nor caused to grow, if you, Jonah, are angry that a plant died, then should I not have just as much reason to have concern for the city of Nineveh? The closing verses of Jonah are sad in terms of the prophet's failure, but they are beautiful in terms of what they tell us about God. In words of great feeling, God reveals himself to be the one who counts the population of the city and how he cares about its children and even, get this, its animals. Jonah chapter 4, verse 11. Should I not have compassion on that great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals? The story of Jonah isn't really about Jonah at all. It isn't about his failure as a prophet. In fact, it isn't even about Nineveh. It's about God. God's mercy toward the wicked city motivates the entire book. And not just Nineveh, the very same mercy that was shown to Nineveh is being shown here to Jonah, the rebellious prophet, as well. God's mercy toward rebels, towards sinners, motivates the entire book, without which the book of Jonah, or for that matter, the entire Bible itself would not exist. This is something much bigger than us or the city. This is about God and his mercy toward sinners, his grace. If it were primarily about judgment, then he would just have destroyed us all from the get-go. And if it were about reforming this city into a city of God, then he would have just brought the city of God down to earth a long time ago. As it is, in the glimpse into heaven provided for us by John in Revelation chapter 7:3, we find that his people and all of heaven sees him properly exalted as the Lamb. Not the lion, but the Lamb. This is precious because here, through the words that are recorded for us in here, do we come to know that God, more than dealing just retribution to sinners, delights in glorifying himself through the glory of his grace. This is why City on Paul exists. This is why the Bible exists. And this is why the cross exists. That all might stand in awe before the glory of his grace. That is the gospel of Jesus Christ. I mentioned briefly earlier that Nineveh was a wicked city and how there's a whole book in the Bible that's devoted to pronouncing judgment upon it. Well, the prophet Nahum, the author of that book, he's not kidding around. He spares no words in describing Nineveh as the city of harlotries and the betrayer of nations. We don't have time to get into the details, but to put it bluntly, Nineveh in the times of Jonah was what Berlin was like to the Jews during the Holocaust. In short, Nineveh was the embodiment of everything Israel hated. Every form of witchcraft and vice was practiced, and the economic and political life of the city was based upon the exploitation of the weak. It was also well known to have killed a lot of babies. Rightly did Nahum call Nineveh a city of blood. And so is Vancouver. And every city in the world for that matter. Jonah was right in condemning Nineveh as being wicked. And so are we when we say that Vancouver is a wicked city. You cannot deny the fact that Vancouver is a wicked city. However, here's the catch. God has compassion on wicked cities. God did not merely condemn the city of Nineveh as being wicked. He also had compassion on it. He dare I say, he loved it. And if a city like Nineveh wasn't beyond God's heart, then Vancouver certainly isn't. God cares for Vancouver. He has compassion towards Vancouver, and he desires that we who call ourselves his people, that we would align our emotions and affections with him regarding this city. Now, I view in high regard those of you who have come out in the heat of the day to worship here at the Plaza of Nations. And a lot of you are going to be fasting for the whole day, so it's not easy. And I want to commend you. And especially, I want to bless those of you who already have a heart for the city. You know, the city needs people like you. That being said, I also recognize that if any of you are like me, you do not yet have a heart for Vancouver. Perhaps you're like me and are instead quite bitter towards this broken city.